I stare at the funeral program in my trembling hands, Grandpa Bill's kind eyes looking back at me from the faded photograph. The viewing ended an hour ago, but I'm still sitting in my beat-up Honda Civic in the church parking lot, unable to face what comes next. My phone buzzes with another text from Uncle Bob demanding I come to the family meeting at the community center. The message is short, cold, and leaves no room for discussion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days since we buried the only person who ever truly believed in me, and my family is already circling like vultures. Tomorrow, the will gets read. Tonight, they want to make sure I understand exactly where I stand in the pecking order. Spoiler alert, it's at the very bottom. The October wind rattles my car windows as I watch the last of the mourners drive away from First Methodist Church. Mrs. Cooper, Grandpa's housekeeper for 20 years, taps on my window with her weathered nickels. Her face is puffy from crying, but she manages a weak smile when I roll down the glass. "He was so proud of you, Jessica. Don't let them make you forget that." Her voice cracks slightly before she hurries toward her own car, clutching her black purse against her chest like armor. I wish I could hold on to her words, but they feel fragile against the weight of what's waiting for me. My grandfather's $1 million estate. His Victorian house on Maple Street that's been in our family for 3 generations. The hardware store he built from nothing and sold just months before his death. Money that could change everything, split between people who spent the last decade treating me like an inconvenience. Uncle Bob made it crystal clear during the funeral reception, "Family takes care of family, Jess, but let's be realistic about expectations here. You're young, you'll have plenty of time to build your own life." Translation, don't expect much from the will reading tomorrow. As I finally start my car and head toward the community center, I can't shake the memory of Grandpa Bill pulling me aside just 2 months ago at my cousin's birthday party. He looked tired that day, older somehow, but his eyes held something I couldn't quite read. There's more to family legacy than what people can see on the surface, Jess. Sometimes the most important gifts are the ones nobody expects. I thought he was talking about his old pocket watch, or maybe his collection of first edition books. Now, driving through the empty streets of Millbrook, I realize he might have meant something entirely different. The Millbrook Community Center smells like industrial coffee and decades of potluck dinners. Folding chairs arrange themselves in a rough circle under fluorescent lights that buzz like angry insects. I'm the last to arrive, naturally, because spending an extra 10 minutes in my car felt better than facing this tribunal any sooner than necessary. Uncle Bob commands the head of the circle, his realtor blazer stretched tight across his expanding middle. At 52, he carries himself with the confidence of someone who's never doubted his place in the family hierarchy. His wife Linda sits beside him, perfectly coiffed blonde hair catching the harsh lighting as she scrolls through her phone with manicured fingernails. Aunt Pat holds court to Bob's right, her insurance company power suit sending its own message about who deserves respect in this room. Her husband, Tom, nods along to whatever she's saying, but his attention keeps drifting to the basketball game playing silently on the wall-mounted television. My mother, Carol, occupies a chair slightly outside the main circle, as if she's not quite sure she belongs with the decision-makers either. At 45, she still carries herself like the baby of the family, waiting for permission to speak. Her divorce from my father 8 years ago left her even more reluctant to assert herself in family matters. Jess, finally. Bob doesn't look up from the legal documents spread across the folding table in front of him. "Sit anywhere you want. We've got some ground to cover before tomorrow's official reading." The available chairs all feel strategically placed to emphasize my position as audience, rather than participant. I choose one directly across from Bob, close enough to read the upside-down letterhead on his papers. Martinez and Associates, the same law firm handling Grandpa's estate. "Now that we're all here," Pat begins, crossing her legs and leaning forward slightly, we need to discuss the practical realities of Dad's will. Bob's been in touch with the attorney, and while we won't know specifics until tomorrow, we can make some educated assumptions about how this will work. She pauses to let that sink in, the implication being that she and Bob have already had conversations I wasn't invited to join. Bob picks up a calculator from the table, the kind with the large display that real estate agents use to impress clients with big numbers. Dad's house is worth about $280,000, maybe $300 if we get lucky with the market. The business sold for $450. His savings and investment accounts total around $320. We're looking at just over $1 million, maybe a bit more. The numbers feel surreal. $1 million. More money than I've ever imagined having access to. More than enough to pay off my student loans, buy a decent car, maybe even think about owning a home someday instead of renting my tiny apartment above the flower shop downtown. Obviously, the bulk of the estate will be divided between Bob, Pat, and myself as Dad's children, my mother says quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. That's standard procedure. Equal shares to the 3 kids. Linda looks up from her phone for the first time with full eye contact, which means roughly $350,000 each before taxes and legal fees. Her voice carries the satisfaction of someone who's already mentally redecorating their kitchen. The question, continues Pat, is what happens to the remainder? There might be some small bequests to the church, maybe something for Mrs. Cooper since she took such good care of Dad, and, of course, something for you, Jess. All eyes turn to me. I feel like a defendant waiting for sentencing. We were thinking maybe 10 or 15,000, Bob says, consulting his calculator again. Enough for you to take a nice trip, maybe buy a reliable car. Dad always worried about you driving that old Honda. $15,000. A sum that would have felt enormous to me 6 months ago, before I knew about the full scope of Grandpa's wealth. Now it feels like pocket change. A consolation prize designed to keep me quiet while the adults divide the real money. That seems very generous, I managed to say, though the words taste bitter. It is generous, Pat agrees, missing or ignoring my sarcasm entirely. Most grandchildren don't inherit anything directly. Usually everything goes through the children's generation first.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Tom finally looks away from the basketball game. My dad left everything to my mom, and when she passed, it came down to us kids. That's how these things typically work. I study their faces, looking for any sign that someone in this room sees the fundamental unfairness of what they're proposing. Uncle Bob, who's been in and out of financial trouble for years, constantly borrowing money for get-rich-quick schemes that never pan out. Aunt Pat, who makes decent money in insurance but spends it all maintaining the lifestyle she thinks her position demands. Even my own mother, who's never asked me for money but has certainly never been in a position to help when I've struggled. Meanwhile, I'm the one who visited Grandpa every Sunday for the past 5 years. I'm the one who helped him sort through old business records when his arthritis made it too painful to manage alone. I'm the one who drove him to doctor appointments when everyone else was too busy with their own lives. There's something else we need to discuss, Bob continues, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. The house. Here it comes. I've been dreading this part. Obviously, none of us can afford to keep Dad's place as a vacation home or anything like that. The property taxes alone are $8,000 a year. We'll need to sell it and split the proceeds. The Victorian house on Maple Street. 4 bedrooms, wraparound porch, original hardwood floors that creak in all the right places. The house where I spent countless childhood summers, where Grandpa taught me to play chess on rainy afternoons, where he told me stories about our family history that stretched back to the town's founding. What about all his things? I ask, my voice smaller than I intended. We'll have an estate sale for most of it, Pat answers matter-of-factly. Furniture, books, kitchen items, that sort of thing. The family photographs and personal items we can divide up between us. Linda perks up again. I saw some really nice antiques when we were there for the funeral prep. That dining room set has to be worth something. They're talking about dismantling Grandpa's entire life like it's a business transaction. The chess set we played with every Sunday, the leather armchair where he read me stories when I was little, the kitchen table where he taught me how to balance a checkbook and gave me advice about boys and college and life. This is all happening pretty fast, I say, trying to inject some spine into my voice. Maybe we should wait until after the will reading to make all these plans. The silence that follows feels heavy with judgment. Bob sets down his calculator and leans back in his chair, studying me with the patient expression he probably uses on difficult clients. Jess, I get that this is emotional for you. Dad was special to all of us. But we're trying to be practical here. These decisions have to be made whether we're comfortable with them or not. The attorney fees alone will eat up thousands, Pat adds. The longer we drag this out, the less there is for everyone. Mom reaches across the space between our chairs to squeeze my hand. Honey, I know this is hard, but your uncle and aunt have experience with these kinds of situations. We should listen to their advice. Experience with these kinds of situations, as if I'm being unreasonable for wanting one day to process my grandfather's death before we start dividing up his possessions like it's prizes at a carnival. The good news is that you won't have to worry about any of the complicated stuff, Linda offers, treating me like a cute, half-witted nephew. Estate taxes, property management, dealing with contractors for the house sale, Bob and Pat will handle all of that. Right. They'll handle the complicated, valuable stuff while I get a check and a pat on the head. We just want to make sure you understand the timeline, Bob continues. The will reading is at 10 tomorrow morning. Assuming everything goes smoothly, we can probably have the house on the market by next weekend. Pat knows a good estate sale company that can handle Dad's belongings efficiently. Efficiently. The word makes my stomach clench. 40 years of my grandfather's life sorted and sold efficiently. What if he left specific instructions about his things? I ask, grasping for any delay, any reason to slow down this juggernaut. What if he had items he wanted certain people to have? The look that passes between Bob and Pat doesn't escape my notice. Well, we'll find out tomorrow, won't we? Bob says with the kind of smile that doesn't reach his eyes. But typically, wills focus on financial assets and real property. Personal belongings usually get handled by the family afterward, which means handled by them with my input politely requested but ultimately irrelevant. I look around the circle again at these people who share my DNA but feel like strangers. Uncle Bob with his calculations and timelines, Aunt Pat with her efficient plans and practical concerns, even my own mother, who's never asked me for money but has certainly never been in a position to help when I've struggled. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting harsh shadows across everyone's faces. Through the community center windows, I can see the lights of downtown Millbrook, the same main street where Grandpa ran his hardware store for 40 years, where he built something from nothing, where he earned the respect of everyone in town through honest dealing and fair prices. Now his children want to liquidate his legacy as quickly as possible, turn it all into numbers on bank statements, and move on with their lives. So we're all in agreement then, Pat asks, checking her watch. 10 o'clock tomorrow at Martinez and Associates, then we start the practical work of settling the estate. Everyone nods except me. I'm staring at the legal documents on Bob's table, trying to read the upside-down text, wondering what my grandfather actually wrote in that will. Wondering if he had any idea how quickly his family would be ready to erase him. Jess? Bob prompts. Any other questions before we wrap up? I have 1,000 questions, but none that I trust them to answer honestly. Instead, I shake my head and watch as they fold up their papers and pack away their calculators, already moving forward with plans that assume tomorrow's will reading is just a formality. As we file out of the community center into the crisp October night, I catch Mom's arm in the parking lot. Did you know about all this? The meeting? The plans? The timeline? She looks uncomfortable, keys jangling nervously in her hand. Bob called me this afternoon. He said it would be better to discuss things privately before the official reading. Better for who? Jess, don't make this harder than it has to be. Your uncle has been through this before when his wife's father passed. He knows how these things work. I want to ask her why she's so willing to let Bob make decisions about her own father's legacy, but the defeated slope of her shoulders tells me she's already resigned herself to going along with everything.
Already given up whatever fight she might have had. Driving home through Millbrook's quiet streets, I passed the hardware store that used to be Grandpa's. The new owners have changed the sign and painted over the green trim he was so proud of. In 6 months, they've managed to erase 40 years of his work more thoroughly than time ever could. Tomorrow, at 10 o'clock, I'll find out exactly how little my family thinks I'm worth. Tonight, I'm going to try to remember what Mrs. Cooper said about Grandpa being proud of me, and hope that counts for something in whatever comes next. The Victorian house on Maple Street sits dark and empty when I drive past, but I swear I can see Grandpa's silhouette in the kitchen window, the way he always used to wait up when I'd visit late. Tonight, though, there's no one waiting, and the house that's been in our family for 3 generations is just another piece of real estate to be sold efficiently. I park outside my apartment building and sit in the silence for a moment, trying to prepare myself for whatever tomorrow brings. Uncle Bob's calculator said $15,000. In 18 hours, I'll find out if he was right, or if there are still surprises left in a world that feels increasingly predictable and disappointing. The October wind picks up, rattling the windows of my Honda and reminding me that winter is coming, whether I'm ready for it or not. Part 2. The Galt Foundation. The law office of Martinez and Associates sits in a converted Victorian house on Elm Street, 3 blocks from the courthouse and 2 blocks from the bank where Grandpa deposited his business earnings for 40 years. I arrive 15 minutes early, partly from nerves and partly because my Honda's heater has been making concerning noises that sound expensive to fix. The waiting room feels like someone's grandmother's living room, complete with floral wallpaper and mahogany furniture that's seen better decades. Helen Baker, the notary, greets me with a warm smile that reaches her eyes. She's been handling legal documents in Millbrook since before I was born, her silver hair always perfectly styled, and her handwriting still elegant despite arthritis that she never complains about. "Jessica, dear, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your grandfather was a wonderful man." She presses my hand between both of hers, the gesture carrying genuine warmth rather than the perfunctory sympathy I've been receiving from most people. The rest of my family arrives in a convoy of vehicles that looks like a small parade. Uncle Bob's white Suburban leads the pack, followed by Aunt Pat's silver Lexus and Mom's modest Toyota. They file into the waiting room with the organized efficiency of people who've already decided how this morning will go. David Martinez emerges from his inner office at precisely 10 o'clock, a thin man in his late 30s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His handshake is firm but not aggressive, the kind of attorney who builds trust through competence rather than intimidation. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time for everyone." He gestures toward the conference room where a polished table reflects the morning light streaming through tall windows. "Please, take seats wherever you're comfortable." The seating arrangement happens naturally, with Bob and Pat claiming the chairs closest to the attorney, while Mom and I settle across from them. Helen positions herself at the far end of the table with her notary stamp and official seal, a silent witness to whatever's about to unfold. Before we begin the formal reading, David says, opening a thick manila folder, "I want to express my personal condolences. I worked with William Mitchell for several years on various business matters, and he was always straightforward and thoughtful in his dealings." Bob shifts impatiently in his chair. "We appreciate that, Mr. Martinez. We're all eager to move forward with settling Dad's affairs as efficiently as possible." "Of course. However, I should mention that Mr. Mitchell's will is somewhat more complex than the typical family estate plan. He was very specific about certain provisions and requested that I explain the reasoning behind his decisions." Something in the attorney's tone makes me sit up straighter. Pat and Bob exchange glances, and I catch the slight tightening around Mom's eyes that usually means she's worried about something. "Complex how?" Pat asks, her insurance professional voice taking over. Well, let me start with the standard provisions and work toward the more unusual elements. David adjusts his glasses and lifts the first document. The last will and testament of William James Mitchell, executed on September 15th of this year. September 15th. Just 6 weeks before Grandpa died. I remember that day because it was the Sunday after his 80th birthday party, and he seemed quieter than usual during our weekly chess game. When I asked if he was feeling all right, he said he'd been thinking about legacy and what it meant to leave something meaningful behind. First, let me address the charitable bequests. Mr. Mitchell has left $15,000 to First Methodist Church for the Building Maintenance Fund, $10,000 to the Millbrook Public Library for their children's programming, and $5,000 to the animal shelter. $30,000 to charity. More than double what Uncle Bob calculated I might receive. I do the math automatically, subtracting from that $1 million estate they were so confident about dividing. Next, we have specific personal bequests. To Nancy Cooper, his housekeeper, he's left $25,000 in recognition of her faithful service and genuine care over many years. Mrs. Cooper deserves every penny of that and more. She was the one who made sure Grandpa ate properly when his appetite started failing, the one who noticed when he seemed confused or tired, the one who called me when she was worried about him. To Frank Wilson, his business partner and longtime friend, he's left his collection of vintage tools and the restored 1957 Chevrolet pickup truck, along with $10,000 for its maintenance and insurance. Frank and Grandpa restored that truck together over 3 summers in the late 90s. I remember them in the garage on Saturday mornings, arguing good-naturedly about carburetors and chrome while classic rock played on an old radio covered in sawdust. Now we come to the family provisions. David's voice takes on a more formal tone. To his daughter, Patricia Henderson, Mr. Mitchell leaves the sum of $50,000. Pat's face goes through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, disappointment, then a tight smile that doesn't quite hide her shock. $50,000 is significant money, but it's nowhere near the $350,000 she was expecting. To his son, Robert Mitchell, Mr. Mitchell leaves the sum of $50,000, with the following notation. David clears his throat slightly. These funds are intended to provide security rather than enable further financial speculation. The silence in the room becomes thick and uncomfortable. Uncle Bob's face flushes red, and I can practically see him calculating how this changes his plans for the house sale and business proceeds. To his daughter, Carol Mitchell, he leaves $75,000, along with his collection of first edition books and family photographs. Mom's hand flies to her mouth. $75,000 represents more financial security than she's had since her divorce and the books collection she's always admired. But like her siblings, she's clearly wondering what happened to the rest of the money. David turns the page, and I notice his slight hesitation before continuing. The remainder of the estate, including the family home on Maple Street, the proceeds from the sale of Mitchell's Hardware and Supply, all investment accounts, life insurance policies, and any other assets not specifically mentioned above, are left in their entirety to his granddaughter, Jessica Ann Mitchell. The words hang in the air like smoke from a fire that hasn't quite caught yet. Everyone stares at David as if he's spoken in a foreign language. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Bob's voice sounds strained, artificial. The remainder of Mr. Mitchell's estate goes to Jessica Mitchell. The remainder being how much, exactly? Pat's professional composure cracks slightly. David consults another document. Based on the most recent valuations, approximately $2.1 million. The number hits the room like a physical blow. $2.1 million. Not the $1 million Bob calculated, but more than twice that amount. And not $15,000 for me, but essentially the entire fortune. That can't be right. Bob's voice rises and he reaches across the table as if to grab the will from David's hands. There has to be some kind of mistake. I assure you there's no mistake. Mr. Mitchell was very clear about his intentions, and the will was executed with all proper legal formalities. Pat looks like she's been slapped. This doesn't make any sense. Jessica is 28 years old. What does she know about managing that kind of money? Furthermore, David continues, ignoring the interruptions, Mr. Mitchell has appointed Jessica as the primary beneficiary of 3 life insurance policies, totaling an additional $400,000, as well as the beneficiary of several investment accounts that were not part of his regular banking relationships. 400,000 more! I feel dizzy, like the room is tilting around me. Mom finds her voice first. David, my father was 80 years old when he signed this. Was his mental state evaluated? The attorney's expression hardened slightly. Mrs. Mitchell, I worked with your father extensively over the final months of his life. He was sharp as ever, asked detailed questions about tax implications, and requested multiple meetings to ensure every provision was exactly as he wanted it. He was also examined by his physician at my suggestion, who certified his mental competency. But this is insane, Bob explodes, standing up so fast his chair rocks backward. She's a granddaughter. She's not even his child. How can she inherit more than his actual children? Because that's what your father wanted, David says calmly. There has to be some kind of legal recourse, Pat insists, her face pale but determined. Undue influence, mental incapacity, something. This goes against all normal inheritance patterns. I finally find my voice, though it comes out as barely a whisper. Why would he do this? David reaches into his folder again and withdraws what looks like a handwritten letter. Mr. Mitchell anticipated this reaction and asked me to read a personal statement explaining his decision. The room falls silent again. Helen Baker watches from her position at the end of the table, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes kind when they meet mine. To my family, especially to those who may be surprised by the provisions of this will, I have given considerable thought to how best to distribute the wealth I've been fortunate enough to accumulate during my lifetime. These decisions were not made lightly, nor were they made in anger or disappointment towards any of my children. Bob sits back down heavily, his face still flushed with disbelief. My son Robert has struggled with financial responsibility throughout his adult life. While I love him dearly, providing him with a large inheritance would likely create more problems than it would solve. The $50,000 I've left him should provide security without enabling the kind of risky investments that have caused him trouble in the past. The accuracy of this assessment is brutal and undeniable. Everyone in the room knows about Bob's failed restaurant venture, his pyramid scheme phase, and his recent obsession with cryptocurrency investments that cost him thousands. My daughter, Patricia, has built a successful career and maintains a comfortable lifestyle. While she values financial security, she has not demonstrated the kind of thoughtful stewardship that I believe is necessary for managing significant wealth. The $50,000 reflects my love for her while acknowledging that her priorities lie elsewhere. Pat's composure finally cracks completely. My priorities lie elsewhere. What is that supposed to mean? David continues reading without stopping to address her question. My youngest daughter, Carol, has faced significant challenges since her divorce, and I want to ensure she has genuine security as well as items of sentimental value that I know she treasures. The $75,000 should provide her with options and peace of mind that she has earned through years of quiet strength. Mom wipes tears from her eyes, but she's also glancing at me with an expression I can't quite read. My granddaughter, Jessica Ann Mitchell, has demonstrated qualities that I believe are essential for responsible wealth management. She has visited me consistently, not out of obligation, but from genuine care. She has shown interest in our family history and traditions. Most importantly, she has lived within her means, worked hard to support herself, and never asked me for financial assistance, even when I knew she was struggling. That last part hits me hard because it's true. There were months when I ate ramen noodles for dinner more often than I care to admit. Months when I worried about making rent, but it never occurred to me to ask my grandpa for money. He was family, not a bank. She has also shown wisdom beyond her years in her career choices and personal relationships. She works in service to her community as a librarian, helps others without expecting recognition, and has never displayed the kind of entitlement or materialism that wealth can encourage. Helping him organize old receipts and tax documents.
I thought we were just spending time together. I never imagined he was evaluating me as a potential heir. I believe Jessica will use this inheritance not just to improve her own life, but to make a positive impact on others. She understands that wealth is a responsibility, not just an opportunity. David looks up from the letter. Mr. Mitchell goes on to detail specific instructions for Jessica regarding the management of the estate, including his hope that she will maintain the family home and consider ways to honor the family's history in Millbrook. The weight of what's happening finally starts to settle on me. This isn't just about money, though the financial implications are staggering. Grandpa has entrusted me with the family legacy, with decisions about our history and future that I never expected to make. "This is ridiculous," Bob says, but his voice lacks the explosive anger from earlier. Now he just sounds defeated. "She's 28 years old. She lives in a tiny apartment and drives a car that's falling apart. What happens when she blows through $2 million in 5 years? "That's exactly the kind of thinking that convinced your father she was the right choice," David responds without missing a beat. Pat tries a different approach. "Jessica, surely you see how inappropriate this is. You can't possibly want to take this much money away from your own family." All eyes turn to me again. The pressure feels enormous, like being asked to solve a math problem in front of the class when I haven't been paying attention to the lesson. "I don't know what I want," I admit. "This is all happening so fast." "Of course it's fast," Mom says, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Honey, this is a lot of responsibility. Maybe there's a way to work something out that would be more equitable for everyone." More equitable for everyone. Code for giving them more money and me less. Helen Baker speaks for the first time since we started. "If I may," she says in her gentle voice, "I've been handling estate documents in this town for 35 years. William Mitchell was one of the most thoughtful and deliberate people I ever worked with. He came to this office 4 times over 2 months, revising details, asking questions, making sure every word was exactly right." She looks directly at me. "Your grandfather was not a man who made impulsive decisions, especially about something this important. He knew exactly what reaction this will would cause, and he made these choices anyway." The silence that follows feels different from the shocked quiet earlier. This feels heavier, more final. "What happens now?" I ask. "Now we begin the process of probate. The will needs to be filed with the court, assets need to be evaluated and transferred, taxes need to be calculated and paid. The process typically takes 6 to 12 months, depending on the complexity of the estate and whether there are any legal challenges." "Legal challenges," Pat repeats, like she's testing how the words sound. "Any heir or potential heir has the right to contest a will if they believe there are grounds to do so," David acknowledges. However, I should point out that Mr. Mitchell specifically anticipated this possibility and took extensive precautions to ensure his wishes would be upheld. Bob and Pat exchange another look, this one loaded with meaning I don't want to interpret. "Can we have some time to process all of this?" Mom asks. "Of course. Jessica, you don't need to make any immediate decisions about the estate management. The probate process will give you time to consider your options and seek advice." As we file out of the conference room, I feel like I'm walking through a dream. $2.1 million, plus $400,000 in life insurance, the family home, investment accounts I didn't know existed, responsibilities I never asked for, and decisions that will affect not just me but everyone in this room. In the parking lot, the family huddle forms automatically, with me standing slightly apart like I've been doing my entire life. Except now, instead of being excluded from the decision-making process, I'm apparently the person everyone needs to convince. "Jess," Bob starts, his voice carefully controlled, "I hope you'll think carefully about what Dad really would have wanted. Family unity has always been important to the Mitchells. What Bob means is that we hope you'll consider a more traditional distribution, something that reflects the actual family structure." Helen looks torn, caught between supporting her daughter and maintaining peace with her siblings. "Maybe we could all sit down together, work out something that feels fair to everyone." I look at their faces. These people who were so confident yesterday about my place in the family hierarchy. 24 hours ago, they were ready to give me $15,000 and considered themselves generous. Now they want to negotiate. I need time to think, I say. The only thing that feels honest. Of course you do, Pat agrees quickly. This is a lot to absorb. Why don't we plan to meet again in a few days after everyone's had a chance to process? I nod and head toward my Honda, fishing for keys in a purse that suddenly feels heavier than it did this morning. Behind me, I hear the urgent whispers of a family trying to figure out how their world just got turned upside down. The drive home takes me past the hardware store again, past the library where I work, past the modest neighborhoods where people live paycheck to paycheck like I always have. Everything looks the same, but I feel like I'm seeing it through different eyes. $2.1 million. The number keeps echoing in my head, too large to feel real. More money than I've ever imagined having, inherited from a man who saw something in me that I'm not sure I see in myself. Part 3, Initial Resistance. The Millbrook Public Library opens at 9 on Tuesdays, and I'm there at 8:45, needing the familiar comfort of books and quiet spaces to process what happened yesterday. Mrs. Peterson, the head librarian, who's been my boss for 3 years, takes one look at my face and immediately puts me on light duty. "Honey, you look like you haven't slept in days. Why don't you work on the children's book inventory this morning? Something quiet and mindless." She's not wrong about the sleep. I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of numbers that seemed impossible every time I repeated them in my head. $2.1 million. $400,000 in life insurance, a Victorian house worth $300,000, investment accounts I didn't know existed, responsibilities I never asked for, and decisions that will affect not just me, but everyone in this room. Every few minutes, my phone buzzes with text messages from family members who apparently stayed up all night strategizing. Uncle Bob had some time to think.
About yesterday, we should talk soon about the practical aspects of managing Dad's estate. Aunt Pat. Jessica, I hope you'll consider the family implications before making any major decisions. Would love to take you to lunch this week. Mom. Sweetheart, call me when you get a chance. I think we need to discuss some options that might work better for everyone. Options that might work better for everyone. Translation, options that would give them more money and me less. The library stays mercifully quiet until about 11, when Frank Wilson shuffles through the front door looking like he's aged 5 years since Grandpa's funeral. His flannel shirt hangs loose on his thin frame, and his work boots scuff against the linoleum as he makes his way to the children's section. "Jessica, I heard about the will reading yesterday." His voice carries the same gravelly tone that used to complement Grandpa's higher pitch during their garage debates. "Figured you might want to talk to someone who knew Bill pretty well." Frank has been Grandpa's business partner and closest friend for over 30 years. If anyone understands why Grandpa made these decisions, it would be him. "Mr. Wilson, I'm so confused about everything. Everyone keeps saying this doesn't make sense, that grandchildren don't inherit before children, that I'm too young to handle this kind of responsibility." He settles into one of the small plastic chairs designed for elementary school children, his knees nearly touching his chin. "Mind if I tell you a story about your grandpa?" I nod, grateful for any insight into what Grandpa might have been thinking. "This was about 15 years ago, when your Uncle Bob was going through his restaurant phase. You remember that disaster?" "I remember. Bob convinced himself he could run an upscale steakhouse in downtown Millbrook, despite having no restaurant experience and limited capital. The venture lasted 8 months before closing with significant debt. Bill came to me, worried sick about whether he should bail Bob out. $50,000 in debt, suppliers threatening legal action, Bob's marriage falling apart from the stress. Your grandpa had the money to fix it all." Frank pauses to look around the library, at the familiar shelves and quiet corners where knowledge waits patiently for anyone willing to seat it. "I told Bill that helping family was important, but enabling them was different. He struggled with that distinction for months. Finally decided to pay off the suppliers to protect Bob's credit, but he made it clear there wouldn't be another rescue." "Did Uncle Bob learn from it?" Frank's laugh sounds bitter. 2 years later, he was into some pyramid scheme, selling health supplements. Lost $12,000 that time. Then it was Bitcoin. Then some kind of online trading system that promised guaranteed returns." The pattern makes sense now, explaining Grandpa's pointed comment in the will about not enabling further financial speculation. Your Aunt Pat's different, but not necessarily better. She makes good money, but she spends it all trying to look successful. New car every 2 years, expensive vacations, designer clothes she wears to church so everyone knows she can afford them. I think about Pat's silver Lexus, her perfectly styled hair, the way she always orders the most expensive item on the menu when we go to family dinners. Bill used to say that Pat measured her worth by what she owned instead of who she was. Made him sad watching her chase status symbols instead of genuine satisfaction. What about my mom? Frank's expression softens. Carol's a good woman, always has been, but she's spent her whole life letting other people make decisions for her. First your dad, then her siblings, now her boss at the accounting firm. Bill loved her dearly, but he worried about her lack of confidence. This assessment feels accurate but harsh. Mom has always been the peacekeeper, avoiding conflict even when standing up for herself might have served her better. So, why me? I ask the question that's been haunting me since yesterday. I'm not some financial genius. I work at a library and drive a 15-year-old car. What made him think I could handle this? Frank leans forward, his weathered hands clasped together. Jessica, I watched you with Bill every Sunday for 5 years. You never asked him for anything, never hinted around for money or favors. When his arthritis got bad and he couldn't manage his paperwork, you spent your own Saturday mornings helping him organize 40 years of business records. Those Saturday mornings feel different now, viewed through the lens of Grandpa's will. I thought I was just helping family. Apparently, he saw something more significant in those gestures. Bill told me once that you were the only person in the family who seemed genuinely interested in his stories about the early days of the business, about your great-grandfather who started the hardware store, about the history of Millbrook itself. That's true. I loved hearing about the town's founding, about how our family had been part of its growth for 4 generations. Those stories felt like treasure to me, more valuable than money. He also noticed that you lived within your means, even when it was hard. Never accumulated credit card debt, never borrowed money you couldn't pay back, never made financial decisions based on what you wanted rather than what you could afford. Frank stands up from the tiny chair with some difficulty, his knees creaking audibly. Your family's going to pressure you to share that inheritance, make you feel guilty for accepting what Bill wanted you to have. They'll tell you it's not fair, that it goes against tradition, that you're too young to handle this kind of responsibility. The accuracy of this prediction makes my stomach tighten. The text messages on my phone already sound exactly like what Frank is describing. But here's what I want you to remember. Bill Mitchell was the smartest man I ever knew when it came to understanding people. He didn't make this decision lightly, and he didn't make it to hurt anyone. He made it because he believed you were the person most likely to use this gift wisely.
Overwhelmed, my family keeps texting about wanting to meet and discuss options, and I don't even know what questions I should be asking. That's completely understandable. Managing this kind of inheritance is new territory for you. Would it be helpful if I explained some of the practical aspects of what you've inherited? Over the next 20 minutes, David breaks down the estate in terms I can actually understand. The house on Maple Street is fully paid off and in excellent condition, generating no debt but costing about $12,000 annually in taxes, insurance, and maintenance. The investment accounts are conservatively managed and currently generating around 6% annual returns. The life insurance policies pay out as lump sums, tax-free. The bottom line is that if you do nothing but maintain the status quo, you'll have an annual income of approximately $130,000 from the investment returns alone. That's before any salary from your job or decisions about selling assets. $130,000 per year, more than 3 times what I currently make at the library without having to work at all. Of course, you have many options. You could sell some investments and buy a smaller, more manageable home. You could use part of the inheritance to fund your education or start a business. You could give portions to family members or charitable causes that matter to you. What would you do if you were in my position? David pauses before answering.
I think I would take some time to really understand what your grandfather was trying to accomplish. He wasn't just giving you money, Jessica. He was entrusting you with choices about how his life's work gets used to impact the future. After hanging up, I walked through downtown Millbrook during my lunch break, seeing the town differently than I ever have before. The hardware store that's no longer ours, the bank where Grandpa deposited decades of earnings, the courthouse where his will is now filed for probate, the community center where my family ambushed me just 2 days ago. For the first time in my life, I have real choices about my future. I could quit my job and travel, go back to school, buy a house, start a business, or simply live comfortably without worrying about rent or car repairs. But those choices come with the weight of family expectations and the knowledge that my decisions will affect other people's lives. My phone buzzes again, this time with a call from Uncle Bob. Jess, I've been thinking about our situation, and I want to apologize for yesterday. The will reading was a shock for all of us, and I may have reacted poorly. His voice sounds different, more measured and careful than usual, less demanding, more persuasive. I understand that you need time to process everything, and I respect that. But I hope you'll also consider the bigger picture here. Dad's estate represents 4 decades of hard work, and I think he'd want it to benefit the entire family, not create divisions between us. Create divisions between us, as if accepting Grandpa's gift would be my fault, rather than the natural consequence of their expectations being wrong. Your aunt and I have been talking, and we think there might be a way to honor Dad's wishes while also acknowledging the traditional family structure. Maybe you keep the house and a significant portion of the estate, but we work out a more equitable distribution of the financial assets. Equitable. There's that word again. I don't want to pressure you, Jess. I just want you to know that we're family, and families should take care of each other. After I hang up, I realize that Uncle Bob has essentially confirmed everything Frank Wilson warned me about. The goat tactics, the appeals to family unity, the suggestion that keeping what Grandpa left me would be selfish or unfair. But what strikes me most is how his tone has changed. Yesterday, when he thought I was getting $15,000, he spoke to me like I was a child who should be grateful for any consideration at all. Today, knowing I control over $2 million, he's speaking to me like an adult whose decisions matter. The money has changed how my family sees me, but it hasn't changed who I actually am. That evening, I drive to the Victorian house on Maple Street for the first time since the funeral. The key still feels foreign in the lock, heavy with symbolism and responsibility. Inside, everything remains exactly as Grandpa left it, from his reading glasses on the kitchen table to the half-finished crossword puzzle beside his favorite chair. The house feels enormous after my tiny apartment, full of rooms I've never spent much time in and furniture that's older than I am. But it also feels like home in a way my apartment never has. This is where I learned to play chess, where I heard stories about our family history, where I spent countless Sunday afternoons that apparently meant more to Grandpa than I realized. Sitting in his kitchen as the sun sets behind the maple trees that give the street its name, I try to imagine what he was thinking when he made these decisions. Did he worry about how his children would react? Did he doubt whether I was ready for this responsibility? Did he consider the alternative of a more traditional distribution? The answers aren't written anywhere, but the house itself feels like evidence of his confidence in me. He didn't just give me money, he gave me the family home, the place where 4 generations of Mitchells have lived and raised children and built legacies of their own. Tomorrow, I'll have to respond to my family's requests for meetings and discussions about more equitable arrangements. I'll have to decide whether to prioritize their comfort or Grandpa's wishes. I'll have to figure out whether I'm strong enough to handle the isolation that might come from keeping an inheritance they think should be shared. Tonight, though, I'm going to sit in my Grandpa's kitchen and try to understand what he saw in me that I'm still learning to see in myself. Part 4. The Threat Escalation. The text message arrives at 6:30 in the morning, waking me from the first decent sleep I've had since the will reading. Family meeting today at 2 p.m. Community Center. We need to discuss the estate situation before lawyers get involved. Please don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. Uncle Bob. I stare at the message, noting how it's phrased as a directive rather than a request.
The implied threat about lawyers is particularly interesting, considering we've already been through the legal process of reading the will. By the time I finish my coffee, 3 more messages have arrived. Mom, honey, please come to the meeting today. Your uncle and aunt are really upset, and I think we can work out something that's fair for everyone. Aunt Pat, Jessica, I hope you understand that family reputation matters in a town like Millbrook. People are already starting to talk. Uncle Bob again. Jess, I've been getting calls from people asking about
About the estate. It would be better for everyone if we handle this privately rather than letting it become public gossip. The escalation is subtle but unmistakable. Yesterday's phone call was persuasive and family-focused. Today's messages carry undertones of social pressure and implied consequences if I don't cooperate. I arrive at the library early, hoping to center myself before whatever confrontation awaits this afternoon. Mrs. Peterson immediately notices my distraction as I misfile 3 books in the first hour. Jessica, maybe you should take some personal days to deal with your grandfather's affairs. You've been through a lot this week. She's right, but the library feels like the only place where I'm still just Jessica the librarian, not Jessica the unexpected heiress who's causing family drama. Here, the biggest decisions involve book orders and programming schedules, not multi-million-dollar inheritances and family politics. Around noon, Frank Wilson appears again, this time looking more purposeful than yesterday's casual visit. "Heard there's another family meeting today," he says without preamble. "Figured you might want to know what people are saying around town." My stomach tightens. What are people saying? "Word's gotten out about the will. Your uncle's been telling folks that there might have been some kind of mistake, that Bill wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. Says the family's working to sort out a more appropriate distribution." The betrayal stings more than I expected. Uncle Bob is essentially telling the community that Grandpa was mentally incompetent, undermining his reputation to justify challenging the will. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store asked me if it was true that you were refusing to share the inheritance with your own family. Someone told her you'd gotten greedy and were keeping everything for yourself. I feel heat rising in my cheeks. I haven't refused anything. I haven't even decided what I want to do. I know that, and anyone who thinks about it logically would know that. But logic isn't always the first thing people reach for when they hear gossip. Frank leans against the circulation desk, his expression serious. "Jessica, I've lived in this town for 68 years. I've seen how these situations play out. Your family's building a narrative that makes you look selfish and unreasonable. If you don't respond carefully, public opinion could turn against you before you've even had a chance to make any real decisions." The weight of community judgment feels heavier than the financial responsibility. Millbrook is small enough that reputation matters, where being seen as greedy or ungrateful could affect everything from job opportunities to social relationships. What should I do? That depends on what you want the outcome to be. If you want to keep the peace and maintain family relationships, you'll probably need to give them a significant portion of the inheritance. If you want to honor your grandfather's wishes and maintain control over his estate, you'll need to be prepared for a more difficult fight. The choice feels impossible. Honor Grandpa's trust and risk becoming a social pariah, or betray his explicit wishes to maintain family harmony. I spend my lunch break calling David Martinez, needing legal perspective on what I'm facing. "Jessica, I'm not surprised by what you're describing. Family challenges to wills often begin with social pressure and public opinion campaigns. Your uncle is trying to create circumstances that make it easier for you to agree to a different arrangement. That's not illegal, but it can be very effective." The community center feels different this time. Instead of the intimate family circle from a few days ago, I walk into what looks more like a town hall meeting. Uncle Bob and Aunt Pat have positioned themselves at a long table, facing rows of chairs, like they're conducting a formal hearing. Mom sits off to the side, looking uncomfortable with the theatrical setup. But what surprises me most are the additional people present. Pastor Miller from First Methodist occupies a front row chair, his Bible resting on his knee. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store sits beside him along with 2 other church members whose names I recognize but can't quite recall. Even Tom Bradley, the mayor of Millbrook, has somehow been included in what was supposed to be a private family discussion. Jessica, thank you for coming, Uncle Bob says as I take a seat in the back row, feeling like a defendant arriving for sentencing. We thought it would be helpful to have some community perspective on this situation. Community perspective. They've turned my inheritance into a public matter, inviting local leaders to witness whatever pressure campaign they've planned. Pastor Miller stands first, clearing his throat in the way that usually precedes his Sunday morning announcements. Jessica, we're all here because we care about you and your family. When situations like this arise, sometimes it helps to have outside guidance from people who've known your family for years. The implication being that I'm too young or inexperienced to handle this decision without community supervision. Your grandfather was a pillar of our church and community, Mrs. Henderson adds, her voice carrying the authority of someone who's lived in Millbrook for 70 years. Bill Mitchell always believed in fairness and taking care of family. This current situation seems contrary to everything he stood for. Contrary to everything he stood for. They're suggesting that honoring his explicit written wishes would somehow dishonor his memory. Mayor Bradley, clearly drawn into uncomfortable with being drawn into a family dispute, speaks more carefully. I don't want to get involved in personal family matters, but I will say that the Mitchell family has always been respected in this community for their generosity and fairness. I hope that tradition continues. The message is clear. Keeping the inheritance as Grandpa intended would be seen as selfish and contrary to family tradition. Sharing it more equally would demonstrate the generosity and fairness the community expects from our family.
8-year-old inherited over $2 million while her grandfather's own children received much smaller amounts. People naturally have questions. She slides a piece of paper across the table toward me. We've prepared a proposal that we think honors Dad's memory while also reflecting more traditional inheritance patterns. I pick up the paper, scanning the neat columns of numbers. According to their proposal, the 3 children would split the majority of the estate equally, about $600,000 each after taxes and expenses. I would receive the family home plus $200,000, which they describe as generous recognition of the special relationship between Jessica and her grandfather. $200,000 instead of $2.1 million. The house, but with the understanding that I'd probably need to sell it to pay the property taxes and maintenance costs. Essentially, they want to reduce my inheritance by 90% while nearly tripling their own. This proposal maintains family harmony while ensuring everyone receives a fair share, Bob explains, his realtor voice in full effect. It also reflects the community values that Dad always supported. Community values. Family harmony, fair share. Every phrase designed to make me feel selfish for considering any alternative. Pastor Miller nods approvingly. This seems like a much more balanced approach. It recognizes your special relationship with your grandfather while acknowledging the legitimate expectations of his children. Legitimate expectations. The expectations they created in their own minds, based on assumptions that proved wrong when the will was read. "What do you think, Jessica?" Mom asks, her voice small and hopeful. It seems like a reasonable compromise. I look around the room at these faces. People I've known my entire life, all waiting for me to agree that my grandfather's explicit wishes were somehow wrong or unfair. The pressure feels enormous, like being asked to stand against the entire community's understanding of right and wrong. Can I have some time to think about this? The question seems to surprise them. Uncle Bob's smile tightens slightly, and I catch the quick glance he exchanges with Pat. "Of course you can think about it," Pat says, her voice carefully patient. "But we hope you won't take too long. The longer this situation remains unresolved, the more difficult it becomes for everyone." Mrs. Henderson speaks up again. "Jessica, dear, sometimes the right choice is obvious, even when it's difficult. Your grandfather raised his children to be generous and thoughtful. I'm sure he'd want you to follow that example." The irony is breathtaking. They're asking me to be generous with money that isn't technically mine yet, to give away an inheritance that was specifically left to me, all while framing their request as following Grandpa's example of generosity.
Mayor Bradley stands, clearly eager to extract himself from this family drama. I hope you'll all work this out in a way that keeps the peace in our community. The Mitchell family has always been respected here, and I'd hate to see that change. The threat is subtle, but unmistakable. Refuse their proposal and risk losing the community respect that our family has built over 4 generations. After the elected officials and church members file out, the family tension becomes more obvious. Bob's careful smile disappears, replaced by the frustrated expression of someone whose carefully planned intervention didn't produce immediate results. "Jess, I hope you're not planning to drag this out indefinitely," he says, dropping the formal tone he used in front of the community leaders. "Pat and I have financial obligations that can't wait forever." Financial obligations. His failed restaurant debt, her luxury car payments, the lifestyle choices that created their money problems in the first place. The longer you wait, the more expensive this becomes for everyone. Legal fees, tax complications, family relationships that might not recover. Mom reaches for my hand. "Honey, I know this is hard, but maybe they're right. Maybe Dad didn't fully think through how this would affect family relationships." Family relationships. The phrase feels loaded with guilt and expectation. Accept their proposal and maintain family harmony. Refuse and be responsible for destroying relationships that have lasted decades. "I need to go," I say, standing up before the pressure becomes unbearable. "I'll call you in a few days." "A few days?" Bob's voice rises. "Jess, this isn't something you can just ignore while you decide what you want." But I'm already walking toward the exit, needing air and space and time to think without feeling like every second of hesitation is somehow letting everyone down. In the parking lot, I sit in my Honda for several minutes, hands shaking as I try to process what just happened. They've escalated from family pressure to community intervention, bringing in local leaders to validate their position and make me feel isolated and unreasonable. The genius of their strategy is how they framed my choice. Either agree to their proposal and be seen as generous and family-minded, or refuse and be seen as greedy and disrespectful to community values. They've managed to make keeping my inheritance look like a moral failing. My phone rings as I'm driving home. David Martinez's name on the screen. "Jessica, I heard there was some kind of community meeting today. I hope you don't mind, but Helen Baker called me. She was concerned about what she heard from her neighbor who attended." Helen Baker, the notary, living in a town small enough that news travels faster than actual conversations? They brought in the pastor, the mayor, and some church members to pressure me into accepting a different distribution. That's exactly what I was afraid might happen. They're trying to create a situation where keeping your inheritance looks socially unacceptable. David's voice carries a frustration that makes me feel less alone. "Jessica, I want to be very clear about something. What your grandfather left you is legally yours. No community meeting or family proposal can change that legal reality. But what if they're right about it being unfair? Unfair according to whose definition? Your grandfather had 40 years to observe his children's financial habits and decision-making. He chose to leave his estate to you based on that long observation. Who's in a better position to make that judgment? Him or family members who want more money?" The question cuts through some of the confusion I've been feeling. Grandpa knew Uncle Bob's history of financial disasters. He watched Aunt Pat chase status symbols for decades. He saw Mom's reluctance to make difficult decisions. His choice wasn't arbitrary or cruel. It was informed by years of careful observation. "They're also wrong about inheritance traditions," David continues. "There's no legal or moral requirement
That estates be divided equally among children. Parents have always had the right to distribute their wealth based on their own judgment about what's best for their family's future." After hanging up, I drive through downtown Millbrook, noticing how differently people look at me. Mrs. Henderson's disapproving frown when I pass the grocery store. The curious stares from other library patrons when I worked this morning. The way conversations seem to stop when I enter local businesses. Uncle Bob's campaign is working.
He successfully framed me as the selfish granddaughter who's refusing to share with her own family, while positioning himself and Pat as the reasonable relatives trying to work out a fair compromise. That evening, I returned to Grandpa's house on Maple Street, needing to feel connected to his memory and reasoning. The Victorian feels different tonight, less like a sanctuary and more like evidence in a case I'm losing in the court of public opinion. I make myself dinner in his kitchen, sitting at the table where we ate countless Sunday meals, trying to channel his voice and wisdom. What would he say about today's intervention? Would he understand why I'm struggling with a decision he thought was obvious? The answer comes from an unexpected source. While washing dishes, I notice a manila envelope tucked behind the sugar canister on the counter, my name written on it in Grandpa's careful handwriting. Inside, I find a letter dated just 2 weeks before his death. "My dear Jessica," it begins. "If you are reading this, then my will has been read, and my family has likely reacted exactly as I expected they would. By now, you've probably been pressured to share the inheritance more equally, told that my decision was unfair or that I wasn't thinking clearly. You may have been made to feel guilty for accepting what I chose to give you." The accuracy of his prediction sends chills down my spine. He knew this would happen, planned for it, even prepared a response to the pressure campaign I'm facing. "I want you to understand that every dollar I left you was earned through decades of careful work and thoughtful saving. I could have spent it all during my lifetime, could have given it away gradually, could have divided it equally among my children, regardless of their ability to use it wisely. I chose instead to leave it to you because I believe you will honor both the work that created it and the responsibility that comes with it." The letter continues for 3 pages, detailing his observations about each family member's relationship with money and explaining the reasoning behind each bequest. His analysis is thorough, loving, but unflinchingly honest about the patterns he observed over decades. Robert has consistently made financial decisions based on optimism rather than reality. Every failed venture has been followed by promises to be more careful next time, but the pattern never changes. Giving him a large inheritance would likely lead to another cycle of poor choices and eventual financial distress. Patricia equates financial security with social status, spending money to create an impression rather than to build genuine wealth. Her income is sufficient for a comfortable life, but she chooses to live beyond her means in pursuit of prestige. Additional money would likely accelerate this pattern rather than change it. Carol is a good woman who has struggled with confidence since her divorce. While I wanted to provide her with genuine security, I also worry that a large inheritance might become another crutch that prevents her from developing the independence she needs. His assessment of each family member is detailed and thoughtful, the perspective of someone who loved them all but understood their limitations. You, Jessica, have consistently demonstrated the qualities that wealth requires: patience, thoughtfulness, the ability to distinguish between wants and needs, and genuine concern for others. You have also shown interest in our family's history and values, suggesting that you understand wealth as something to be stewarded rather than simply consumed. The final paragraph addresses exactly what I'm experiencing tonight. If you are feeling pressured to ignore my wishes in favor of family harmony, remember that true harmony cannot be built on disregarding someone's carefully considered decisions. I chose you not to punish my children, but to ensure that the wealth I spent a lifetime creating will be used thoughtfully and purposefully. I fold the letter carefully, feeling like Grandpa has reached across death to provide exactly the guidance I needed. His decision wasn't impulsive or unfair. It was the culmination of decades of observation and careful thought. The community meeting, the pressure from family, the social disapproval, none of it changes the fundamental fact that he trusted me with this responsibility for reasons he considered carefully and documented thoroughly. My phone buzzes with another text from Uncle Bob. "Jess, I hope you're thinking seriously about our proposal. The longer this drags out, the harder it becomes for everyone involved." For the first time since the will reading, I know exactly how to respond. "I understand your concerns, but I need more time to make such an important decision.
I'll let you know when I'm ready to discuss next steps. It's not the immediate agreement they're hoping for, but it's also not an outright refusal. Most importantly, it's an assertion of my right to make this decision on my own timeline, not theirs. As I lock up the house and drive back to my apartment, I realize that something fundamental has shifted. The weight of community disapproval still feels heavy, and the family pressure hasn't diminished, but I'm no longer questioning whether I deserve what Grandpa left me. The question now is whether I'm strong enough to honor his trust, despite the social cost of doing so. Tomorrow will bring more pressure, more guilt tactics, more appeals to family unity and community values. But tonight, for the first time since this began, I feel connected to Grandpa's reasoning and confident that his decision was both thoughtful and intentional. The inheritance isn't just money, it's a test whether I can stand up for his carefully considered wishes when everyone around me insists those wishes were wrong. Part 5. The outside perspective. The knock on my apartment door comes at 7:30 on Thursday morning, too early for anyone with good news. I open it to find Nancy Cooper, Grandpa's former housekeeper, holding a thermos of coffee and wearing the determined expression of someone who's made a difficult decision. "Jessica, honey, I hope you don't mind me stopping by so early. I heard about what happened at the community center yesterday, and I think we need to talk." Mrs. Cooper has cleaned houses in Millbrook for 30 years, which means she knows more family secrets than anyone else in town. If she's here at 7:30 in the morning with coffee and a serious expression, she has something important to say. I invite her in, clearing
Yesterday's mail off my small kitchen table so we can sit facing each other. She pours coffee from her thermos into 2 mismatched mugs, the ritual giving us both time to settle into what feels like a significant conversation. "I've been wrestling with my conscience since Tuesday," she begins, her weathered hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "When I heard about the will reading, I was so happy for you. Bill talked about you constantly, always saying how proud he was of the young woman you'd become. The past tense hurts every time. Grandpa talked about me, believed in me, but he's not here to defend his decision when everyone questions it." But then I started hearing the talk around town. People saying the will didn't make sense, that maybe Bill wasn't thinking clearly toward the end, that you should do the right thing and share with your family. Mrs. Cooper's voice hardened slightly. That's when I realized I had information that might matter. Information I've kept private for 20 years out of respect for your family. My stomach tightens. In my experience, sentences that begin with "I've kept this private for 20 years" rarely lead to pleasant revelations. "Jessica, there are things about your uncle and aunt that your grandfather knew but never discussed publicly. Things that influenced his decision about the will. Things that might help you understand why he made the choice he did." She reaches into her purse and withdraws a small notebook, the kind with lined pages that she uses for grocery lists and household reminders. "I started writing things down about 15 years ago, when I noticed patterns that concerned me. Not gossip, mind you, but things I witnessed directly while working in your grandfather's house." Mrs. Cooper opens the notebook, pages covered with her neat handwriting and organized by date. "Let me start with your Uncle Bob. In 2008, right after his restaurant failed, he came to your grandfather's house asking for help. Not just money to pay off debts, but a loan to start another business venture, some kind of import company that was going to make him rich." She finds the page she's looking for, dated March 15th, 2008. "I was cleaning the living room when Bob arrived. He didn't know I was there, and I heard the entire conversation. He wanted $50,000, promised he'd pay it back with interest within 2 years, said this new business was guaranteed to succeed where the restaurant had failed." The coffee in my stomach turns cold as Mrs. Cooper continues reading from her notebook. "Your grandfather listened patiently,
then asked Bob to explain exactly how this import business would work. Bob's explanation kept changing. First, it was electronics from China, then handmade crafts from Mexico, then organic supplements from Canada. When Bill pointed out the inconsistencies, Bob got defensive and accused him of not believing in family. The pattern sounds depressingly familiar, matching Frank Wilson's description of Uncle Bob's approach to business ventures. Bill told him no, said he'd help with the restaurant debts to protect Bob's credit, but he wouldn't fund another speculative venture. Bob stormed out, shouting that his own father didn't support him and that he'd remember this when Bill needed help someday. Mrs. Cooper turned several pages, finding another entry from 2011. 3 years later, Bob was back. This time, it was some kind of online trading system, promised returns of 30% annually with minimal risk. He'd already invested $12,000 of his own money and wanted Bill to invest $50,000 so they could really make this work. The cryptocurrency phase. I remember Mom mentioning Bob's excitement about digital currency investments that were going to solve all his financial problems. Again, Bill said no. Asked Bob why he kept chasing get-rich-quick schemes instead of building wealth slowly and steadily like he had with the hardware store. Bob accused him of old-fashioned, said he didn't understand modern investing. Mrs. Cooper's expression grows sad as she recounts these conversations. The worst part was watching how these rejections affected Bob. Instead of learning from his mistakes, he became resentful, started making comments about how Bill was too conservative, too cheap, didn't understand that you had to take risks to make real money. She flips to a more recent entry, dated just 18 months ago. Last time Bob asked for money was for some kind of real estate investment program. Promised he could flip houses using other people's money, make huge profits with minimal personal investment. Wanted Bill to co-sign a loan for $200,000. $200,000. More than most people make in 3 years, risked on another scheme that probably promised easy wealth with no actual work. Bill told him absolutely not. Said he'd watched Bob lose money on 7 different ventures over 20 years, and he wasn't going to enable another financial disaster. Bob accused him of favoritism. Said Bill was probably planning to leave everything to you anyway, since you were the only grandchild who visited regularly. The accusation turned out to be accurate, but probably not for the reasons Bob imagined. Mrs. Cooper closes the notebook, her expression thoughtful. Your grandfather never told me about his will, but after that last conversation with Bob, he made a comment that stuck with me. He said that giving someone money they haven't earned rarely teaches them how to earn it themselves. The observation explains so much about Grandpa's thinking. He wasn't trying to punish Uncle Bob. He was trying to avoid enabling destructive patterns that had persisted for decades. What about Aunt Pat? Mrs. Cooper's face tightened slightly. Patricia's situation was different, but equally concerning to your grandfather. She makes good money in insurance, probably more than most families in Millbrook. But she spends every penny trying to look successful instead of actually building wealth.
Required her to maintain a certain image, that clients expected her to look successful. She'd argue that you had to spend money to make money, that Bill didn't understand how competitive her industry was. The rationalizations sound exactly like conversations I've had with Pat over the years. Her explanations for why she needs expensive things that other people somehow manage to live without. The breaking point came about 5 years ago when Patricia asked Bill to help her refinance her house. She wanted to pull out $60,000 in equity to pay off credit card debt and get a fresh start financially. $60,000 in credit card debt? More than twice my annual salary. Accumulated buying things she couldn't afford with money she didn't have. Bill told her that borrowing against her house to pay credit cards
was exactly the kind of thinking that created financial problems in the first place. He offered to help her create a budget and payment plan, but he wouldn't enable her to go deeper into debt. Mrs. Cooper's voice grows quieter, like she's sharing something particularly painful. Patricia accused him of being unsympathetic to her struggles, said he didn't understand the pressures of modern life. She stopped visiting regularly after that, only came around for holidays and family obligations. The timeline matches my own observations. Pat's visits to Grandpa became less frequent and more perfunctory over the past few years, like she was fulfilling duties rather than enjoying family time. Your grandfather was heartbroken about it. He loved Patricia dearly, but he couldn't watch her make financial decisions that would create long-term problems just to solve short-term ones. Mrs. Cooper finishes her coffee, the conversation clearly weighing on her as much as it is on me. Jessica, I'm telling you this because I think you deserve to understand why Bill made the decision he did. It wasn't arbitrary or unfair. It was based on 20 years of watching his children make choices that concerned him. The weight of this information feels enormous. Uncle Bob's history of failed ventures and get-rich-quick schemes, Aunt Pat's chronic overspending and debt accumulation, both of them repeatedly asking Grandpa for money to solve problems created by their own poor judgment. Mrs. Cooper, why didn't you ever say anything about this before? She sighs deeply. It wasn't my place to share family business. I was employed by your grandfather, not appointed as judge of his children's behavior. But when I heard people questioning his mental state or suggesting his will didn't make sense, I realized that staying silent might be doing you a disservice. My phone rings, interrupting our conversation. Uncle Bob's name appears on the screen, the timing feeling almost comically appropriate. Let it go to voicemail, Mrs. Cooper suggests. You've got enough information to process right now. But curiosity gets the better of me. I answer the call, putting it on speaker so Mrs. Cooper can hear. Jess, I hope you've had time to think about our proposal. Pat and I are meeting with an attorney this afternoon to discuss our options, and we'd prefer to work this out as a family rather than getting lawyers involved. The threat is obvious. Agree to their terms or face legal challenges that could drag on for months and cost everyone thousands in attorney fees. I'm still considering everything, I respond, my voice steadier than I expected. Well, consider this, Bob's tone sharpens. The longer you drag this out, the more it's going to cost everyone. Legal fees, tax complications, family relationships that might never recover. Is keeping all that money really worth destroying your family? Family relationships that might never recover? The same family relationships that apparently consisted of Bob and Pat asking Grandpa for money whenever their poor choices created financial problems. I understand your concerns, Uncle Bob. I'll let you know my decision soon. Soon isn't good enough, Jess. We need an answer by Monday, or we're going to have to explore other options. He hangs up without saying goodbye, leaving me staring at my phone in the sudden silence. Mrs. Cooper reaches across the table and squeezes my hand. Honey, that man just threatened you with legal action if you don't give him money that was never his to begin with. Does that sound like someone who should be trusted with a large inheritance? The question cuts through all the guilt and confusion I've been feeling. Uncle Bob isn't concerned about family harmony or community values. He's concerned about getting access to money he's already spent in his imagination. What should I do? Mrs. Cooper stands up, collecting her thermos and notebook with the decisive movements of someone who's made up her mind about something important. You should honor your grandfather's wishes, Jessica. He spent 40 years earning that money and 80 years learning to judge character. If he thought you were the right person to inherit his life's work, then you probably are. She pauses at my apartment door, looking back with the kind of expression that carries decades of wisdom.
And if your uncle thinks he can pressure you into changing a legally binding will by threatening legal action, he's about to learn exactly why your grandfather was right about his judgment. After Mrs. Cooper leaves, I sit in my kitchen feeling like I've been given pieces of a puzzle that finally form a complete picture. Grandpa's decision wasn't based on favoritism or mental confusion. It was based on decades of observing his children's relationship with money and making a careful judgment about who could be trusted with the responsibility of wealth. Uncle Bob has spent 20 years asking for money to fund failed schemes, never learning from his mistakes or accepting responsibility for poor decisions. Aunt Pat has consistently lived beyond her means, accumulating debt to maintain an image of success rather than building actual financial security. Meanwhile, I've lived within my means, worked steadily to support myself, and never asked for financial help even when I struggled. More importantly, I've shown genuine interest in our family's history and values, not just its financial assets. The inheritance isn't a windfall or a lucky break. It's the result of a careful evaluation by someone who knew all of us well enough to make an informed decision about our character and judgment. For the first time since the will reading, I feel completely confident that keeping what Grandpa left me isn't selfish or unfair. It's honoring the wishes of someone who earned the right to make this decision and who made it based on sound reasoning and long observation. Grandpa's deadline of Monday suddenly feels less threatening and more like an opportunity. An opportunity to show him that his threats and pressure tactics won't work on someone who finally understands the full story. Part 4. The Resolution. Monday morning arrives gray and drizzly, the kind of October weather that makes
Millbrook feels smaller and more insular than usual. I wake up in Grandpa's house on Maple Street, having spent the weekend sleeping in his guest room and thinking through everything Mrs. Cooper told me. The Victorian feels more like home now, less like a museum of someone else's life, and more like a foundation for whatever comes next. My phone shows 17 missed calls from Uncle Bob and 12 text messages, each one more urgent than the last. The final message, sent at 11:30 last night, reads simply, "Deadline is today, Jess. After this, lawyers get involved." I make coffee in Grandpa's kitchen, using his favorite mug with the faded hardware store logo, and call David Martinez before I lose my nerve. "Jessica, I was hoping to hear from you today. How are you holding up?" "I've made my decision about the inheritance. I want to keep it exactly as Grandpa intended." The silence on the other end stretches long enough that I wonder if the call dropped. "David, are you there?" "I'm here. I'm just relieved to hear you say that. I was worried the family pressure might convince you to abandon your grandfather's wishes." His relief makes me realize how much he's been invested in this outcome, how much he respected Grandpa's judgment and wanted to see it honored. They want me to meet them at the community center at 2 o'clock today for my final answer. I think they're expecting me to agree to their proposal. Are you prepared for their reaction when you tell them no? The question makes my stomach clench, but I've spent the weekend rehearsing this conversation in my head. As prepared as I can be. Jessica, I want you to know that you're making the right choice. Your grandfather was one of the most thoughtful men I ever met, and his decision about his estate was carefully considered. You're honoring his judgment by accepting what he chose to give you. After hanging up, I spend the morning walking through the house, really seeing it for the first time as my home rather than a place I visited. The hardwood floors that creak in familiar patterns, the built-in bookshelves filled with volumes that span decades of careful collection, the kitchen table where I learned to play chess and listened to stories about our family's history in Millbrook. This isn't just a house worth $300,000. It's 4 generations of Mitchell family history, the anchor that kept our family connected to this community and to each other. Grandpa didn't just leave me real estate. He left me the responsibility of continuing that legacy. The community center parking lot is already full when I arrive at 1:45. Uncle Bob's white Suburban positioned prominently near the entrance, like he's claiming territory. Through the windows, I can see the same setup as last week. The long table facing rows of chairs, the theatrical arrangement designed to make me feel like I'm being judged by the entire community. But this time, I noticed something different. Frank Wilson's old pickup truck sits in the far corner of the lot, and Mrs. Cooper's sedan is parked beside it. They're here to support me, to provide alternative voices if the pressure becomes overwhelming. Inside, the scene plays out exactly as I expected. Uncle Bob and Aunt Pat command the head table, flanked by the same collection of community leaders who apparently have nothing better to do on a Monday afternoon than mediate a family inheritance dispute. Pastor Miller, Mrs. Henderson, Mayor Bradley, and 2 church elders whose presence is meant to lend moral authority to whatever verdict they've predetermined. Mom sits in the front row, looking miserable, caught between supporting her daughter and maintaining peace with her siblings. But she's not alone. Frank Wilson occupies a chair in the back row, his weathered face set in determined lines. Mrs. Cooper sits beside him, her notebook visible in her lap like a lawyer preparing for cross-examination. "Jessica, thank you for coming," Uncle Bob begins, his voice carrying the forced warmth of a salesman closing a difficult deal. "We've spent the weekend talking with community leaders and family friends, and I think we've reached a consensus about the best path forward." Consensus, as if my opinion is just one voice among many, rather than the only one that actually matters in determining what happens to my inheritance. The proposal we presented last week represents the fairest and most reasonable solution to this situation, Aunt Pat continues, consulting papers spread across the table. It honors your grandfather's special relationship with you while acknowledging the legitimate expectations of his children. Legitimate expectations. The phrase still irritates me, implying that they had some kind of legal or moral right to inheritance that supersedes Grandpa's explicit wishes. Pastor Miller stands, his Bible clutched in both hands like a shield against uncomfortable family dynamics. "Jessica, we've prayed about this situation extensively, and we believe the Lord calls us to be generous with our blessings, especially when it comes to family." The religious appeal feels particularly manipulative, suggesting that keeping my inheritance would be contrary to Christian values, while giving it away would demonstrate proper faith and generosity. Mayor Bradley nods solemnly. "The Mitchell family has always been respected in this community for their fairness and consideration of others. We hope that tradition continues with the next generation." Mrs. Henderson speaks up from her front row seat, with her voice carrying the authority of 70 decades in Millbrook. "Your grandfather was a generous man who always put family first. I'm sure he'd want you to follow that example." The implication being that keeping what he left me would somehow dishonor his memory, while giving most of it away would honor his legacy of generosity. Uncle Bob leans forward, his expression carefully crafted to project paternal concern. "Jess, we're not asking you to give up everything. Under our proposal, you'd still receive more than most people see in a lifetime. The house, $200,000, the satisfaction of knowing you've done right by your family. $200,000. Still a fortune by most standards, but 90% less than what Grandpa actually left me. The mathematical sleight of hand is impressive, making their proposal sound generous while actually asking me to surrender the vast majority of my inheritance. We've also discussed practical considerations," Pat adds, consulting her papers again. "Managing a $2 million estate is enormously complicated. Tax implications, investment decisions, legal responsibilities that could overwhelm someone without experience in financial management. The condescending assumption that I'm too young or inexperienced to handle wealth with appropriate professional guidance, as if being 28 automatically disqualifies me from learning about estate management, while being 58 makes you a guru by virtue of having a checkbook.
Being in their 40s or 50s grants automatic expertise despite their demonstrated history of poor financial decisions." The room falls silent, everyone waiting for my response to their carefully orchestrated intervention. I look around at these faces, most of whom I've known my entire life, all expecting me to agree that my grandfather's judgment was somehow flawed or unfair. I appreciate everyone taking time to share their thoughts, I begin, my voice steadier than I expected. But I need to tell you something that might change how you view this situation. Uncle Bob's confident expression falters slightly. "What do you mean?" I stand up, wanting to face them as an equal rather than a defendant. Mrs. Cooper has shared some information with me about conversations she witnessed over the past 20 years. Conversations that help explain why Grandpa made the decisions he did. Mrs. Cooper rises from her back row seat, notebook in hand, her silver hair catching the fluorescent lights as she moves toward the front of the room. "If you'll permit me," she says, her voice carrying quiet authority, "I'd like to share some observations from my 20 years of working for William Mitchell." The shift in the room's energy is immediate and uncomfortable. Uncle Bob and Aunt Pat exchange worried glances, clearly not expecting their private family business to become part of this public discussion. "Mrs. Cooper, I don't think that's necessary," Bob says quickly. "This is a family matter that should be resolved privately." It became a public matter when you invited half the town to pressure Jessica into changing her grandfather's will. Frank Wilson interjects from the back row, his gravelly voice cutting through Bob's objection. Mrs. Cooper opens her notebook, consulting pages covered with neat handwriting and careful dates. "Over the past 20 years, I've witnessed Robert Mitchell ask his father for financial assistance at least 8 times, always for business ventures, always with promises of guaranteed returns, always followed by financial losses that his father had to help cover. The specific number hits the room like a physical blow. 8 failed ventures, 8 requests for money, 8 cycles of optimism followed by disappointment and blame. The restaurant in 2007, the import business in 2008, the online trading system in 2011, the cryptocurrency investments in 2015, the real estate flipping program in 2018. Each time, Robert promised he'd learn from previous mistakes. Each time, William paid off debts to protect his son's credit rating." Uncle Bob's face flushes red, his careful composure cracking under the weight of documented evidence. "Those were private family conversations. You had no right to eavesdrop or take notes. I had no choice but to overhear conversations that took place in the main living areas of the house where I was working, and I started taking notes because the pattern was concerning." She flips to another section of her notebook, finding entries related to Aunt Pat. "Patricia Henderson made regular complaints to her father about financial difficulties, despite earning a substantial income in insurance sales. Credit card debt exceeding $60,000, mortgage refinancing to pay for lifestyle expenses, constant requests for help with car payments, vacation costs, and credit card bills." Pat looks like she's been slapped, her professional composure dissolving as her private financial struggles become public knowledge. "How dare you spy on our family and record private conversations?" she demands, her voice rising with anger and embarrassment. "I wasn't spying. I was working, and these conversations happened in my presence. When people began questioning William's mental competency and suggesting his will didn't make sense, I realized that staying silent might allow an injustice to be done." Pastor Miller looks deeply uncomfortable, clearly regretting his involvement in what has become a public airing of family financial failures. Mayor Bradley studies his hands, probably wishing he'd stayed in his office instead of getting drawn into this mess. Frank Wilson stands up, his presence adding weight to Mrs. Cooper's testimony. "I can confirm what Nancy's saying. Bill came to me repeatedly over the years worried about his children's financial judgment. He loved them dearly, but he watched them make the same mistakes over and over without learning from the consequences." The authority in Frank's voice silences the objections. As Grandpa's business partner and closest friend, his perspective carries more weight than anyone else in the room. "Bill told me that every time he bailed out Bob or Pat, he was enabling them to avoid responsibility for their own poor choices. He worried that a large inheritance would just allow them to make bigger mistakes with more serious consequences." Frank's eyes fine line across the room, his expression supportive and encouraging. "Jessica, your grandfather watched you for 28 years. He saw you work hard to support yourself, live within your means even when it was difficult, and showed genuine care for family without expecting anything in return. His decision to leave you his estate wasn't arbitrary or unfair. It was based on decades of careful observation about character and judgment." The silence that follows feels different from the expectant quiet earlier. This feels heavy with uncomfortable truths that no one wants to acknowledge, but everyone recognizes as accurate. Uncle Bob tries to salvage the situation, his voice strained but still attempting authority. "Even if some of what you're saying is true, that doesn't change the fact that Jessica is still young and inexperienced. A $2 million inheritance is a huge responsibility."
She's 28 years old, with a college degree and 3 years of professional work experience. She's perfectly capable of learning about estate management with appropriate professional guidance. More capable than someone who's lost money on 8 failed business ventures, Frank adds, his comment landing like a physical blow. Aunt Pat makes one last attempt to control the narrative. This is still about family unity. Even if Dad had concerns about our financial management, that doesn't mean he wanted to create divisions within the family. He wanted to ensure his life's work would be used wisely. And based on everything I've learned about his reasoning, I believe keeping the inheritance as he intended is the best way to honor his memory. The words come out stronger and more confident than I expected. For the first time since this ordeal began, I feel completely certain about my decision. "So you're refusing our proposal?" Uncle Bob asks, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "I'm accepting Grandpa's proposal, the one he made legally binding in his will after careful consideration of everyone's character and financial judgment." The aftermath happens quickly. Pastor Miller and Mayor Bradley both make hasty excuses about prior engagements and leave the hall.
Mayor Bradley make polite excuses and leave as fast as possible, clearly wanting to distance themselves from what has become an ugly family dispute. Mrs. Henderson follows them out, her disapproval obvious, but no longer intimidating. Uncle Bob and Aunt Pat pack up their papers with sharp, angry movements, their careful intervention having backfired spectacularly. "This isn't over," Bob says as he prepares to leave. "We'll be consulting with attorneys about our legal options." "That's your right," I respond, my voice calm despite my racing heart. "But you should know that David Martinez has assured me the will is legally sound and that Grandpa took extensive precautions to ensure his wishes would be upheld." Pat stops at the door, turning back with one final attempt at guilt. "I hope you're prepared to live with the consequences of this decision, Jessica. Family relationships that take decades to build can be destroyed in a single afternoon." "Some relationships aren't worth preserving if they're based on people expecting money they never earned," Frank Wilson calls out, his comment following them into the parking lot. After they leave, I sink into a chair, the adrenaline that carried me through the confrontation finally ebbing away. Mrs. Cooper and Frank gather around me, their presence reassuring and supportive. "How do you feel?" Mrs. Cooper asks, her weathered hand gentle on my shoulder. "Relieved, scared, grateful." I look up at both of them. "Thank you for being here. I couldn't have done this without your support." "Your grandfather would be proud of you," Frank says, his gruff voice softer than usual. "You honored his judgment even when it cost you family relationships. That takes real character." Mom approaches hesitantly, her face showing the strain of being caught between her daughter and her siblings. "Jess, I want you to know that I support your decision. It wasn't easy to watch, but I think you're right to honor Dad's wishes." Her words mean more to me than she probably realizes. Having at least one family member understand and support my choice makes the isolation feel less complete. "What happens now?" Mom asks. "Now the probate process continues," I tell her. "David says it will take 6 to 12 months to transfer everything officially, but the legal challenges Uncle Bob threatened probably won't succeed." We walk out of the community center together, the October afternoon feeling crisp and full of possibility, despite the gray skies. In the parking lot, Frank shakes my hand with the firm grip of someone sealing an important agreement. "If you need advice about managing your grandfather's affairs, don't hesitate to call. Bill would want me to help you succeed." Mrs. Cooper hugs me gently, her embrace carrying the warmth of someone who's watched me grow up and believes in my potential. "Remember what your grandfather always said about wealth, dear. It's not about what you have, it's about what you do with what you have." Driving home through downtown Millbrook, I pass the hardware store that used to be ours, the library where I still work, the church where Grandpa's funeral was held just 2 weeks ago. Everything looks the same, but I feel fundamentally different. I'm no longer the overlooked granddaughter hoping for family acceptance. I'm the inheritor of 40 decades of careful work and thoughtful saving, trusted with the responsibility of continuing our family's legacy in this community. The financial security feels overwhelming in the best possible way.
No more worrying about rent or car repairs or student loan payments. No more choosing between groceries and gas. No more feeling trapped by circumstances beyond my control. But more important than the money is the validation of Grandpa's confidence in my character and judgment. He saw something in me that I'm still learning to see in myself, and his trust has given me permission to believe in my own potential. That evening, I sit in Grandpa's kitchen, my kitchen now, writing thank you notes to Mrs. Cooper and Frank Wilson. Their willingness to speak uncomfortable truths in defense of justice made all the difference in today's confrontation. My phone rings around 8 o'clock, Mom's name on the screen. "How are you doing, honey? Today was pretty intense." "I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. I feel like I can finally breathe again." "Your uncle and aunt are pretty angry. They're talking about hiring an attorney to challenge the will." The threat doesn't carry the weight it might have a week ago. David Martinez says they don't have legal grounds for a successful challenge, and even if they try, I'm prepared to defend Grandpa's decision. Mom is quiet for a moment before speaking again. "I'm proud of you, Jess. It took courage to stand up to family pressure like that." "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." After hanging up, I pour myself a glass of wine from Grandpa's collection and walk through the house that's slowly beginning to feel like home. The Victorian is full of history and possibility, rooms that could be updated or renovated, spaces that could host family gatherings or community events. For the first time in my adult life, I have genuine choices about my future. I could travel, go back to school, start a business, or simply live comfortably while figuring out what I want to do with the rest of my life. But I also have responsibilities. Mrs. Cooper's $25,000 bequest needs to be processed. Frank Wilson's vintage truck inheritance requires proper documentation. The community organizations Grandpa supported will be expecting continued donations from his estate. Most importantly, I have the responsibility of proving that his faith in my judgment was well placed. The inheritance isn't just money. It's a test of whether I can use wealth wisely and generously while maintaining the values he tried to instill in our family. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the same kitchen, but everything has changed. The probate process is nearly complete, with all legal challenges dismissed exactly as David Martinez predicted. Uncle Bob and Aunt Pat's attorney withdrew their case after discovering that Grandpa had video recordings of himself explaining his reasoning for the will, recordings that made his mental competency undeniable. The Victorian house has been updated with modern heating and electrical systems, but I've preserved all the historical details that give it character. The hardware store collection that Grandpa maintained has been donated to the Millbrook Historical Society, where visitors can learn about the town's commercial heritage. I've established the William Mitchell Foundation, a scholarship fund for local students pursuing careers in education, healthcare, or public service. The foundation awards $50,000 annually to young people who demonstrate the same values of hard work and community service that Grandpa embodied throughout his life. My relationship with Uncle Bob and Aunt Pat remains strained, limited to polite exchanges at family gatherings, but Mom and I have become closer than ever.
We've grown closer, bonding over our shared experience of standing up to family pressure and making difficult decisions based on principle rather than convenience. Most surprisingly, I've discovered that I enjoy the responsibility of managing wealth, working with financial advisors and investment managers, learning about tax strategies and charitable giving, making decisions about how Grandpa's money can best serve the community he loved. The inheritance has given me freedom, but more importantly, it's given me purpose. I'm no longer just Jessica the librarian living paycheck to paycheck. I'm Jessica Mitchell, steward of a family legacy and contributor to my community's future. Tonight, I'm hosting the first annual William Mitchell Memorial Dinner, bringing together local business leaders, educators, and community volunteers to discuss how we can work together to strengthen Millbrook's economy and educational opportunities. 25 people will gather around the dining room table that's been in our family for 4 generations, continuing the tradition of using our home as a place where important conversations happen and meaningful relationships are built. Grandpa would be proud to see his house filled with people working toward positive change in the community he served for 40 years. His decision to trust me with his legacy has created opportunities for impact that extend far beyond anything money alone could accomplish. The grandfather clock in the front hallway chimes 7 times as guests begin arriving for dinner. Frank Wilson is among the first, looking distinguished in a suit instead of his usual work clothes. Mrs. Cooper follows him up the front steps, carrying a covered dish despite my insistence that tonight is my treat. David Martinez arrives with his wife, both of them admiring the restoration work I've had done on the house's original features. The new pastor from First Methodist brings his family, continuing the tradition of church-community partnership that Grandpa always supported. As I welcome each guest into the home that's become the foundation for everything I hope to accomplish, I think about the journey that brought me here. 2 years ago, I was struggling to pay rent and driving a car that needed constant repairs. Tonight, I'm hosting community leaders in a house that represents 4 generations of family history. The transformation isn't just financial. I've discovered confidence I never knew I possessed, learned to trust my own judgment even when others disagree, and found purpose in using resources wisely rather than simply accumulating them. Uncle Bob and Aunt Pat drive past during dinner, their headlights briefly illuminating the dining room windows where animated conversations continue late into the evening. I wonder if they understand yet that Grandpa's decision was never about punishment or favoritism. It was about ensuring that his life's work would continue to benefit the community he loved, carried forward by someone who shared his values and vision. The inheritance changed my life, but more importantly, it's given me the opportunity to change other lives in ways that honor both Grandpa's memory and his faith in my potential.